Frankie!
Ian, you magnificent bastard.
How are you, buddy?
I am doing fantastic.
We are talking about money today.
Let's do it.
We are going to talk about money. So the topic today is, how should I ask my manager for an increase in pay? And I think this is it's a complex topic, and I think we're going to need to qualify it on a different, on a couple of different things. I think we're going to have to qualify it on the size of your company. I think we're going to have to qualify it on what exactly does more pay mean to you, and how much more pay are you looking to make. But I think before we dive into just trying to answer that question, because it's not as simple as giving someone a script, I think we can start with some questions that someone would need to ask themselves before they even bothered with that discussion. And you and I went through and put together kind of a list of questions that we would ask ourselves if we were working for a company before we even bothered. And should I just get into those questions? Should I just dive right in?
I think so. Let's do it.
Okay. So I think that the first question is as important as any, and I've been consistently shocked with how ignorant people could be on this topic over the years. But the question that we talked about is my company thriving? Is my company thriving? How healthy is my company? And I think there's a lot of ways to know this, but one is just paying attention and listening to what your managers are talking about. If you're publicly traded, you can obviously read a quarterly report, but most people don't work for a big company like that. But paying attention and asking questions. It's pretty simple to know how well your company is doing. Are you adding people? Are you subtracting people? Is it a flat baseline? How are sales? Do the managers seem to be stressed out and putting a lot of pressure on people to get more sales, right? Or do they seem to be, are there more happy hours? Are there more times where they're trying to give more encouragement because they're trying to keep people? Those are all signs. Those are all signals that you can read if you're paying attention.
For sure. And so I run a small company, 25 people. You've worked for monster companies. What's the most you go without having some kind of a check-in with the uppers? Quarterly? Even in the time of COVID, we do some kind of stuff regularly. So like, if you don't know how your company's doing, it's probably a you problem, or you work at a terrible company. But even small companies with communicative leaders, they're going to tell you, like, this is where we're at. I mean, you can very easily parse out, is this a good time or is this a bad time for us?
Yeah, it's, as a manager, when someone's asking me that, and they're asking me for a raise at a time where we're cutting staff, we're stressed out about a big drop in sales, right? We just went through a COVID pandemic. You can imagine going to your manager and asking for a raise if you worked in the hospitality industry or the airline industry in March or April of 2020. You would demonstrate to me that you have almost zero emotional intelligence. You are absolutely business clueless. And that's not someone I want to pay more. That's not someone I'm looking to retain if during a time where the company is trying to survive, you're thinking selfishly. That kind of person is not the kind of person I'm looking to retain.
So you and I talked about this in prep, right? And during March, I had this situation come up. So coronavirus is a black swan event. Nobody thinks it's coming. Everyone freaks out. Like right after 9/11, if you're still listening to podcasts and you were live for Pearl Harbor, congratulations to you. Right after Pearl Harbor, like any of those moments is the wrong time to go in and ask.
I remember when Granddad turned on the radio.
So one of the things you got to think about is current events, right? Like what's going on in the world. The stock market negatively reacts to uncertainty and it positively reacts to certainty. Businesses are no different. People's psyche is no different. if you aren't sure if my company's doing well or not well, you are not qualified to ask for a raise. In addition to that, if something major is going on in the world and something happens in your life that you must have a comp conversation, you better have had done all the work with your manager earlier. And what I mean by that, so I'll give a quick example, right? We're having a pretty crazy life right now. Right after coronavirus hits, I fire 25% of my staff. 6 days later, a kid comes up to me and goes, boss, I want a raise, like directly to me, not to his managers, directly to me. And I'm like, were you not conscious when we had a conversation and we just eradicated 25% of our staff? Were you not there for this?
And it's not like you just did it. I mean, you and I went through your talking points before you did that. You were really thoughtful in how you explained it to your team, how you communicated it. You were emotional. You put a lot into communicating that. It wasn't like one day they showed up and people were gone. You really went through, there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm nervous. I want to survive. I want to come out of this stronger. But you made it real clear that I'm not sure if this is the last time I'm going to have to do this. No one knows how bad this could get.
The other thing I did, Ian, is right then and there, I cut my salary to zero. Like, I don't pay myself a ton, but I own a business. I don't pay myself, minimum wage. I took my salary from a relatively sizable salary to zero, and the HR company made me take it to like $3,000 a month so I could still get health insurance. But I basically took myself to zero, very, very, very low. I was the lowest paid person in the entire company. And I said that, like, I want to preserve the business. I don't want to preserve myself. I have a cushion. I'm worried about the other, 20 plus people. And then someone's so tone deaf, they're like, hey, I want to raise within a week of that. Like, that is the wrong time to do it. And that person within a month was gone by just conversations. And I kind of convinced him that this wasn't the right job.
And it probably wasn't that conversation. Someone who's that tone deaf was probably on your wrong side before they even came in to have that conversation. It wasn't like just by asking that you thought he's got to go, but it was probably another straw that he was laying on your back that just was kind of helped solidify that this guy doesn't understand.
There were already enough arrows pointing in the direction of this guy might be an idiot. And that was the one where it was like, I'm like, I'm done fighting for you, man. Like, it made no sense. It's pretty clear you're just tone deaf.
And I think, Frank, if your company isn't great at communicating, right? You're a good communicator. Big companies are good at communicating how things are going for the company. But if your company's not, let's say you work for someone who's kind of old school, doesn't really share much, that doesn't mean you can't ask. You can ask some questions. How are sales? How are we doing this quarter? There are all kinds of signs you can find out, but most managers are going to share that with you. Are we up? Are we up over last year at this time? Are we up over last month? Are we up over last quarter? Ask those kind of questions. See how the company is doing. And usually those staff is going to tell you a lot. Are you adding or are you subtracting staff? Is the company tightening things up? Did the company just take away the Christmas party? Did the company just put restrictions on all travel? Those are little hints that should tell you we're trying to save money, so times are not as good as they were a year ago or something else. And
that's
this
right.
doesn't mean that you can't ask for more money during a tough period. It's a question you need to know. It's an obstacle you're going to have to overcome.
So here's a question for you, right? You have a boss, we'll leave his name out. He intimidated the shit out of me for years. Like, I didn't have a lot of exposure to him, but when he would show up, like, I was always scared. And he was one of those guys that was not a great I think he was a masterful communicator, but he made it seem like he had a very thick outer wall. And in the 21st century, we would call it, he had an FU wall. He had an FU wall way before that was a popular term. But you still got raises with him. You still got, your career flourished. So how did you handle it?
Yeah, and during major housing recession, 2008, 2009, he took care of me every year. Honestly, with the person that you're talking about, Billy, you know, I never asked him. Because he wasn't the kind of guy that you did that with. What I did was I made sure that I performed better than everyone at my level. I wasn't a headache to him. When he asked me to do things, I did them. I pushed back respectfully. I knew the things that irritated him that would hinder my compensation. I knew not to argue with him in a group ever in front of people. I knew if I wanted to get some change done, I would go, you know, talk to him outside of it. But I knew the tripwires that set him off, that set off his FU wall, as you said. And I didn't mess around with them. And we're going to talk about something on the setup, though, a little bit later. There are a few things I've done there with him that I think I set it up a little bit to give him just a little bit of anxiety that I, you know, wasn't going to be loyal to the core and stay forever if I wasn't paid enough. You know, and there's ways to do that. There's ways to bring that kind of stuff up. But with that individual, I never asked because I never needed to. I took care of my business, and he was the kind of guy that rewarded someone. That's how he rewarded you. He didn't put his arm around you and say, "I'm really proud of you. You're doing great." It wasn't his style. Money was never a problem with him if you were a performer.
So I'm sitting on my lead here, like, and I don't want to bring it up now, but so what I think we should do is let's move to number 2, and then that way we can kind of talk about.
Well, number 2, you just kind of got into it a little bit. Number 2. So the first question is my company thriving? Number 2, do I have a strong relationship with my manager? And that I think that could easily be moved to number 1, just the same. But Frankie, why do we have that as our number 2 question?
Nobody gets where they're going on their own. You always have to have support. And it's so important to build those relationships. And like, I'm just dying to say this. So I think I got to just say it. You got to be great at what you do. You got to be the best. Like you got to be reliable. You've got to be someone who doesn't just look selfishly at myself. Like I can't remember asking for a raise. I don't think it was maybe 8-9 years in. Something pretty drastic happened, and I gotten a ton of rewards. I've been promoted a bunch of times. So you gotta, and this is something we're going to talk about at length later. What's your goal? Like, do you really want to have this dialogue and put someone in a tough spot? Like, if you have pretty quickly earned the right to have a great relationship with a manager, they'll go fight for you, but you can't do it every 3 months. So you have to kind of pick your spots. And what I would think is way more valuable than having the raise conversation up front, and this is how relationships are built. You eat a little bit of shit. You do some of the stuff you don't want to do. You make it so your manager thinks you are incredibly valuable. And this is where money starts to come in. You become irreplaceable. Mm-hmm. And when you become irreplaceable, that boss knows that you are the number 1 person. You're their number 1 draft pick. That's how a relationship is formed and forged. If you can do that kind of stuff, that builds all the really important things with, do I have a strong relationship with my manager? Because they know they can rely on you.
Yeah. And understand what you're doing here. There are only 2 types of people that you are going to be asking for a raise from. You're going to be asking a raise from an owner, a Frank Cava, who owns a company, has 25 employees. You're asking Frank directly. So what are you asking Frank? You're asking Frank if he will make less money for you. That's what you're asking for. So you are saying, I'm worth it, and I would like you to make less money. I'm worth it. That's at the end of the day, that's the same thing. If you're probably going to perform about the same, right? Which is great if you're asking, but you're asking Frank to make less money. He's going to pay you more. That comes right out of the profit center. Or you're asking a manager who is worried about their own political capital in a company and understands that if they go pay you more, they probably have to ask a whole bunch of people, and it's going to take a few chips off the table. They're going to get asked a lot of questions. Why this person? Why are you supporting them? How good are they? They have to do the mental calculus of, if I pay this person more, now I'm the one that went and did this unusual thing, and everyone's going to be watching to see if this person performs really well. Period. That's a fact. And if they don't, I'm going to get questioned of why I would have given more money to the person. So the reason why I have a strong relationship with my manager is important is because you're asking that manager to put their own personal reputation on the line. So they had better trust you, they had better like you, and they had better know without a shadow of a doubt that you are worth it. Because if they don't, they're not going to put their political capital up, or they're not going to make less money for you if you've not proven it. So that question is incredibly important.
So let's talk about this a little bit. I just thought of something while you were talking. You wrote a post on LinkedIn a few weeks ago about negotiating when you start a job. Before you start a job, you're nameless. Nobody's putting their capital on the line. It's like, do they want you or do they not? I would think you are better suited to negotiate your face off before you're in the company. And then don't spend that capital on piddly raises. You want to spend that capital on promotions. You want to spend that capital on more responsibility. You want to spend that capital on, hey boss, rely on me. I won't let you down. Because as you become more valuable, like Ian, I don't know if we've ever talked about this. Like when I left NVR, I was making almost 7 figures, which is not an insignificant amount of money. My opening salary was 34 grand, and that took 11 years. So like going from negotiating, getting from 34 to 36 means very little when you can take that by, I don't know, what's the math on that? 20 times up. So to that end, be strategic. Before you're there, negotiate a salary that if you got no raises and can go work your rear end off, you could live on it and you could be quite pleased because you got the right number. Then it gives you kind of no burden to just go do and perform.
Yeah, and especially in a big company, the amount of inertia that someone has to overcome to get you more than 3% in a big company is obnoxious. I mean, it's just, if you're going to work for a big company, you have no idea how much grief your manager is getting just to get you more than 3.5% on any given year. An incredible raise is 4 or 5% unless they're promoting you or doing something else. So to Frank's point, it is much easier for a manager to give you 10,000 more in a starting offer than it is to give you 2,000 in the middle of the year. That sounds stupid, but that's big companies right there. That they're not the smartest when it comes in. A lot of times they give too much power to someone in HR or someone who's got the keys, or they put too much weight on ranges, or some of it's just hubris. We're big, we got marketing, we have sales, we're safe. We pay what we pay. We'll find someone else.
That's
right?
it.
Because the bigger the company gets, the less any one person hurts when they leave. That's just the way it is. So the bigger your company gets, the less leverage that you have. So number 3 could go a little bit with number 1. Is my company hiring more people for my position? And that part's important, because you could work for a company with thousands of people and you're the only training manager in the company. So if they're not hiring more for that position, they're not showing a need. But you could, in that same company, they might have hundreds of warehouse positions that they're adding, and they need really good people that are doing that. That would give you more leverage. So, you're looking for, how hard is it for my company to go find other people that do what I do? Because if it's hard, obviously they don't want to lose one. They don't want to lose someone who's good. And a smart manager knows that someone who's been with a company for a while that's good at that job is probably going to be twice as productive as a new employee for their first year. That's just kind of the way it is. So losing you is like losing 2. They would have to go hire 2 to replace you. And they can't even find that person to go get it done now. So when you're talking about how much am I paid, everything is about leverage, and you have more leverage with your company when they are hiring people than when they are flat or taking them away. Do you have anything to add on that one?
I don't think so. You touched on this in the last point, which I think is important. Hiring new people usually come in at a higher range than where you were hired. But you also said something that kind of solidified one of my points. When you're invaluable, even if you're the only trainer in a huge company, if the sales blow up, you became invaluable. You're doing a great job. So those two things, negotiate on the front end and be invaluable in your job, are themes that are going to be pervasive through this.
Which rolls us right into question 4, which is, am I performing demonstrably better than my peers? Objectively, measurably better. Can I, if there are 100 sales peers of mine and I am a sales rep and I want to get into a different tier of commission, a better one, can I go take that list and say, I'm 7? I'm 7. And by the way, I was 8 last year. I'm a top 10 rep in this company. If you can say that, your odds of getting more money go way up than if you say I'm 57. Because if you're 57, I don't give a shit if you leave. I can replace you. If you're 77, I hope you leave. You just did me a favor. Don't ask me for more money. I'm looking to pay you less because you're costing me money. So if you're not performing, why the hell would your manager, why would they want to keep you, first off? And 2, why would they think it's that difficult to go replace you?
Right.
They don't. It comes back to Frank's point of, are you irreplaceable? It is not hard to replace someone who's 57th out of 100. It's not hard. It's, you go interview for a while, you can go find an average person. You can't go find an exceptional person with all the culture, with all that does everything right, that has a great attitude, that delivers results. You just can't. So if you're not irreplaceable, and you can't show that you're performing demonstrably better, you got no business asking for more money.
I think you said plenty here. I'm going to just reiterate this. Don't be obtuse. If you're obtuse, you're going to get pushed out of a company. Like, know what's going on, which is what we've talked about to this point. In addition, do I deserve to ask? You have to know, do I deserve to ask? To Ian's point of, you must be demonstratively better. Have I mastered my job? That's it. Rainer Altman, who was 6 rungs ahead of me when I started, pulled me aside after 12 to 18 months of being on the job. And he said to me, he goes, can I give you some advice? And I said, sure. He goes, do you want to get promoted? I said, yeah, of course. He goes, let me tell you how to get promoted. Forget about being promoted. Just be irreplaceable in your job. Everyone will notice that you're so good at this and better than anybody else. Promotions, raises, all of that will follow. Just go do the job. And he kind of looked at me.
Awesome advice. It's awesome advice.
He looked at me, he nodded, and he walked away. I mean, I may have had 15, 20 interactions with that guy in my whole life. And this one 20 years ago. That's good advice.
Yeah. And Rainer Altman did just fine in his career. He did just fine. He did well with living that kind of life, right?
And for people who don't know who this person is, he was top 5 at NVR. Like, he was really high up, and pretty damn good advice for a 23-year-old kid.
Well, the thing is, Frank, if you're focused on getting promoted, what are you not focused on?
Doing the job.
Right. And if you're politicking, getting, just daydreaming about the next job you should be doing. And people that do that tend to get bitter of, why am I not in it yet? Why have I not been promoted? If all of those thoughts are running around in your head, you're not focused on your job. Now you're not performing well. And when someone brings your name up, right, they say, why would we promote that person? They're not real good at what they're doing, and then the argument is, well, but I would be much better at the next job. Bullshit. Show me. If you can't do the job of the person you're going to lead, don't tell me you'd be a better leader of people than a better doer. I don't care if that's your opinion. You better perform well, because the other thing is, you're not going to get those people's respect if you got to go lead them at some point anyway. So I think we probably beat that one up quite a bit, but if you're not good at your job, you really shouldn't ask for more money. And if you need to make more money, you should probably go somewhere else and convince them you're better than you are, because you can't fool the company you're in. You just can't fool them. They can see your numbers.
Exactly. I think you move on.
Fifth question and last question is, and I think this one's important to have your numbers. Am I paid less than the market rate for my contributions? So regardless of what your job is, if you're a project manager, if you're a programmer, if you're a graphic design artist, it doesn't really matter. There's a market rate someone is willing to pay for what you contribute. You should know that, right? And often what happens, people that want to raise, often what happens is a company takes a chance on you and they hire you without much of a background, so kind of entry level. So you're paid on the low end of the scale. And really that's a risk decision, right? If you're bringing someone in who's never sold before and you're bringing them in as a salesperson, they're not going to pay you much because I don't know if you can sell yet. You're an unknown. And then after 6 months, you prove to be one of the best salespeople in the company. Now you're significantly underpaid and you have experience. So a lot of times this happens in a company. You go from inexperienced and worthless to very valuable in a year because you're surrounded by good people that taught you, that showed you the ropes. You had a good manager, they coached you up. And this can happen on a regular basis where there's a very big disparity in what you're being paid and what a competitor would pay for you. Now, when you started on day one, the competitor would pay the same that your company would because you had no experience. But now that you can put a year on your resume with that company doing very good things, that changes things. That changes everything about what a competitor would pay. So you have to pay attention, especially when you're young, this happens, or you're new to an industry. You have to pay attention. Have I exceeded the market through the experience that I've had in this company? And if you have that data. Have that data ready to go. And if you're paid more than market, you better be really giving more value than the average person that's out there if you're still planning to go in and ask for an increase.
So I'm gonna talk about a scenario real quick, right? So this happens a lot, especially at corporate. So you get an old salty dog that's in a job for 20 years and they're getting 3% a year. But the market doesn't appreciate 3% a year like a raise would, like Ian talked about. It could go 5, it could go 10. Sometimes it's $10,000 just on a base salary. It could change quickly. So most of the people listening to this podcast, you're probably not an old salty dog in a job. But we've talked in other podcasts about how important it is to be a good manager and to build loyalty with your staff. If there's a disparity that you see with one of those leaders in your staff, and you know you're hiring someone right out of college who makes way less. And I saw this at NVR a lot. Like we would pay a new hire 50, 55 grand, and we were paying someone else a base salary of 45 who had been in the job for 20 years. That's as a manager when you want to go fight, because that person is invaluable and they're underpaid. And most of the people are so loyal, they're not going to come up and talk about that. But that's Ian's point. If you're in a job for a very, very long time, the water is boiling and you probably aren't getting those raises. So that's when strategy comes into place. That's where you are long-term in a role. It then makes sense every 5 or 10 years to have the comp conversation about, I'm probably underpaid for my performance. I'm really valuable to the team. If you've got a great manager, they're going to do that for you. And you might have a great manager for a period of time, but if they're really a great manager, they're most likely going to get promoted to something else, and you're still going to be in that role. But that's the time where these conversations are relevant. And then you do need to educate yourself a little bit. Selfish and self-assured are very, very closely related. In the comp conversation, I think one of the most important things is not to be delusional, but to have self-esteem. And let's talk about the difference between a salesperson and a non-salesperson. I love it. I own a small business. I love it when a salesperson looks at the percentages as I'm hiring them and says, hey, can we talk about the upper tier? What if instead of 6%, I could get to 8%? Like that's self-confidence. those numbers, that if you negotiate that stuff, I'm more willing to say, hey, if you get over this threshold, which is a big threshold for us, I'd be willing to pay you a little bit more. That's the kind of stuff that you can do. So like Ian said, I know I'm going to go into the job, I'm going to dominate, I'm going to take care of my business. Having the self-confidence of, once I do hit this threshold, I want to get even more of the upside. It's kind of like sports contracts. Don't do it like the Ricky Williams where you make it ridiculously impossible to hit the terms, but set it where the terms make sense, that you can get them. It's exciting for you. That's the kind of stuff where you can reward yourself, and you can do a lot of that very, very, very quietly, and you can do it in a way that is proactive.
Yeah. And I think after you've asked these questions, you really need to ask yourself what your end goal is. I think you gave just a great example. There are a ton of people like that in organizations, and you're right. They've been there 8 years and they're making 60, and we just hired a kid out of college for 54, and guess who's training them? Right? This person who can run circles around them in the job could do 3 times the volume, and they make about 4,000 more. You could see that and get bitter and get upset, or you can just be rational and say, you know what, it's time I go talk to my manager and ask for something. And if you've got a decent manager all day long, if they weren't paying attention, which they should have, but if they weren't, they're going to go make that right. But then that's one scenario. But, for me, I can't recall a time in 20 years, Frank, where I asked for more salary ever. I don't ever remember doing that. For me, it was multiples. I wanted to know, how quickly can I start making multiples of what I'm making? I remember I'll tell a story. So it's like my second full year at GE, and I was at the annual sales meeting, and I got this big award. So it was like the 5 E's award. GE had their 5 E's: energy, edge, whatever. So it was kind of like the top sales guy, the guy that had all the culture, exhibits everything, gets results. I wasn't the number one salesman out of 100 some salesmen, but I got this award that was kind of like, it was kind of like a little Heisman Trophy award they gave me at this meeting. And I went up, I accepted it, took a picture with the VPs, came back, and Macaulay and a few of the other sales guys were all sitting at the table, and we'd been drinking beers. It's an annual meeting, and they're like, man, that's incredible, right? And these guys, they're all older than me, a bunch older than me. And they're like, they must be paying you like a couple $100,000 a year to be that good. And I'm like, no, man, I'm not making that. And they're like, what do you make? And I think at the time it was like 60 or 65,000. I was like 2 years out of college, right? So my first job was like 50. Then I got like a 10% raise to 55. And then I got a sales rep job. So it was like 60. These guys were all making 150 to 175 plus commissions. So I was like making a third of it, right? And they just were howling. They were crying, laughing. They were howling at me. And it got me mad at the time. But I kind of thought about it, and I went to my boss, and I was like, man, I think I'm really underpaid. And he's like, don't listen to any of those guys. He's like, they've been sales reps their whole lives. They're going to be sales reps the rest of their lives. Let me show you what I make. He's like, what you care about is options. What you care about is equity. What you care about is the next job. He's like, how long do you want to be a commission sales rep at GE? And I was like, well, I hadn't thought about it. And he's like, that's why you're different. He's like, you're just doing a good job. He's like, I want you to be a manager in a year. I want you to be, and here's why that matters. And from that moment on, I never talked to anyone at GE or NVR about anything except equity. I asked multiple times for more options. I negotiated more options at NVR before I got there. I negotiated more all the time. I always made it clear I want to be a part of the next option pool, because I knew that would give me multiples of income. And I always wanted to make sure I was doing what I needed to do to be looked at as someone that should have more responsibility. Because when you have more responsibility in an organization, it will pay you more. That's just a fact.
We alluded to this earlier. You and I didn't know each other during this stretch of our careers. We never gave one shit about incremental. We cared about exponential. And what we did is we sat tight. We built our reputations. We built our skill set. We worked really hard. We were often promoted into shit jobs. And I said, I got you, boss. I'll go do it. I'll go fix this community. I'll drive an extra hour. I'll do this stuff because I want to prove to myself that I can do it. And I know if you're asking me to do it, you need me to do it. But you do that kind of stuff and you do it with a smile and you do it well and you do it ahead of schedule. Then raises don't come in percentages. They come in exponentials. And that's how it happens. That's how you go from 65 grand base to 150 base or 300 base. Like those are big jumps. And those are things that definitely can change the arc of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think that's a good way of saying it. So you got to know what your end goal is. If you're, look, with all of that, with going from multiples and exponentials, I mean, I left Chicago, I moved to DC where I knew nobody. I left a safe job to make multiples of what I was making. If you're going to do that, you're going to sacrifice a lot and the pressure is going to be way ratcheted up. So you have to want pressure. If you're going to go make 2-3x what you're making today, the pressure is going to be 2-3x. That's just the way it is. I don't expect much of a $40,000 employee. I just don't. I don't pay you enough to expect the world of you to fix a company. But if I'm paying you 400, damn right, I expect a hell of a lot out of you, both from time you put into the job to results that you get to production. So if you want those things, you got to really know it. But if you look, there's a lot of people that are listening. They're like, I don't want any of that. I want to be really good at what I'm doing. And I am, and I'm pretty sure I'm paid less than everyone else. Right. And so if your goal is to make 15, 20, 25%, okay, that's fine. That's a good goal. Everyone doesn't have the same ambitions. If that's the case, then, you should address it and you should address it tactfully. If your goal is to keep doing the same job, you should make as much money as humanly possible doing that job. Right. That's the way I look at it. If you're a, what's a position that you would have, Frank? If you're like a tenant manager for Cava companies, right? And that's a job that other real estate companies have. They all have these.
Of course.
And if that's what you want to do for the next 25 years of your life and nothing else, you don't want more than that. You love that job. That's what you want to do. Then your goal should be the highest paid tenant manager in the industry. That should be your goal. Like if your goal is, if you just love sales or you love programming or you love being a project manager, great. Then you should try to be the highest paid at that. And I think those are two different goals to what Frank was doing, which was grinding, building his brand, looking for more responsibility. Or I kind of figured this out. This is what I love to do. I'm passionate about it. I'm great at it. I want to keep getting better and I want to make as much as I possibly can at it. Those are two different goals.
For sure. And sometimes you got to be careful. Making as much as you possibly can be a disservice to yourself. If you're in the 92nd percentile for the job, but you've got stability, that might mean something too. So people who usually get rewarded with the most money are people who are cognizant of what's going on, people who are really good at what they do, and people who know what their market value is and are potentially willing to accept a little bit less for longevity. But people who constantly jump, it doesn't work well long-term if you want to be if you're a free agent and you're a 1099, that works. But if you work at a company, you got to be cognizant of that because jumping around a lot is not necessarily the best solution either.
If you like your company's culture, try to make as much money as you can in that company. Don't threaten to leave. Don't run and leave right away. Have these conversations with your manager. Figure out how you can go get that money and stay in the culture that you enjoy with that manager whose relationship you value. All of those things are worth a ton. Frank and I were not job jumpers. I worked for 2 places in 20 years. Frank worked for 1 in 13 years. So I wasn't a jumper. I did everything I could to make sure I made as much as I could within a culture that I liked and that I enjoyed.
So,
Um,
Ian, I think it's a good time to wrap this. Why don't you kind of give an overview?
so, well, I think we gotta help with the approach and the setup a little bit. So how do you even have this conversation? So I think if you're going to do it, there's two things. There's one, you rarely, it's a myth to think that you're just going to walk into your manager and ask for money and walk out 10 minutes later. It doesn't work that way. You want to have a bit of a setup. And a setup is, so if you've answered yes to all the questions we've already talked about, the setup with the manager is to leave just a seed of doubt that you are there for the long haul. And this doesn't have to be in a negative way. This just has to be in a way that lets them know that you want more, that maybe this isn't something you're going to have, uh, you know, forever if you're not paid as much. So there's ways that you can drop it without putting it right into the conversation. Um, I I did this 3 years before I left NVR. I went to my boss and I said, here's three things that I've invested in outside of NVR. I'm turning 40 and, I just had a real heartfelt conversation with him and I wasn't bullshitting. I honestly was thinking of leaving and I was turning 40 and it was messing with my head. Like, why am I still here? Why am I still going to start meetings? Why am I still talking about missed settlements? There's a lot of stuff I don't care about. And here's three things that I've invested in that I could go spend more time on right now. And I walked him through all of it. I walked him through Code Guard and I talked about, things that I could do with my father-in-law. And 2 weeks later, I had a massive promotion, massive raise, more equity, more money. I really didn't ask for it. I just was having an honest conversation with my manager that I was thinking of other things that I could be doing in my life. And I had that relationship where I could bring that to him. I was performing. I was doing the job of like 4 people. And I knew by just bringing that up, something good was going to happen to me. Now, I couldn't have played that. Like, I couldn't do that every 6 months. And if I'd have done that again 6 months later, at some point, you're just going to wear out all that goodwill that I had stacked, that big chip pile. But I think you have to set it up a little bit. You have to set it up a little bit with your manager that I don't know what's going on with me in my career here. I'm getting a little antsy. I just want to tell you, because I trust you and I like you a lot, that I've been thinking of other things to do in my career. That is not going to ever get someone mad. Like, I need your advice. You're someone I respect. I look up to you. You've been doing this for a long time. I'm not sleeping at night because I'm seeing you during the day and you're such a good boss. And I know that I'm thinking of doing other things than working here. And I feel guilty not sharing that with you.
So
There are so few bosses that would take that wrong that I know of.
completely. So Ian and I last week were in Detroit together fishing the Detroit River. No kidding. So like, you got to know when to set the hook.
God's country. God's country.
You got to know when to set the hook. Ian's talking as an executive level person who did everything we've talked about. He earned the right to have that level of conversation. If you're lower down the rung in your career, like we both have been, the approach works. Hey, what's my future look like? What do you see? Those should be regular conversations. Annually, maybe every 6 to 24 months is the right time, depending on where you are in your career. But those should be regular conversations. And if you prove yourself to be a doer and a reliable person, and you have even a decent manager, they're going to have these conversations with you on a regular basis. So, and then you have to be honest, but then you have to pick the right spots. Like, do not do that in front of 40 people. Do that behind closed doors. I've had people like literally on a team call ask about comp. Wrong time. Ask about that behind closed doors. So you got to pick the right time, pick the right moment, and do the stuff that we talked about. But that's it. And if you've done the right stuff and you have the right relationship with the manager, this is what happens. It's conversational. If you've done the wrong stuff, it can be acrimonious.
And so you've set it up. And now if someone comes to you, Frank, and says, Frank, I love this company. I love working for you. I feel like I need to talk to you though about money. I feel like, my personal goals, I would like to make X. And I would like to just have a conversation with you of what kind of value I would have to add to this company, what more I could do for this company to put myself in a position to make that. Because you give me everything I want in a career, except right now I'm not reaching my financial goals. If someone brought that up to you, would that offend you if they brought it up that way?
No, and especially with what you just said, which is smart. Being myopic never leads you to a raise. Being altruistic, what can I do for the company to add more value? And if I add more value, will that then compensate me? I have that, like, I need to make more money. Well, go get a part-time job. I want to do what I can to make this place a better place and a more profitable place. Oh, I'm into that conversation all the time. Anytime, like open arms.
And on a regular basis, you give people more responsibility.
That's it.
You give them more to do. You give them a little bit more to rope in, see how they do. And you're pretty quick to go pay someone more if they're delivering results.
Hell yeah.
Because they'll make Cava companies more money. You'll get a return on it.
Absolutely.
But that negotiation is happening. If you want more money, tell me how the return gets better. Tell me my return on that investment, and let's have that discussion. And then you better live up to it, right? You better live up to what you're telling me is going to be better.
That negotiation is going on every single day at work. Yeah. And you're either winning the negotiation or you aren't. And the way as an employee you're winning or losing is based upon your performance. If you're performing, you're giving yourself all the chips that you could possibly need for the raise or the promotion discussion. If you are not performing, you're not. It's just that simple.
And Frank, as a manager, would you rather someone come have that discussion with you than tell you someone just made me an offer? What would you rather have? I mean, if someone's going to come in and talk to you about money, wouldn't you rather they give you a heads up that that's on their mind? So
for sure.
Because you're not a mind reader. The hell do you know what they're thinking?
Right. I mean, having the dialogue and having the relationship with your employer is imperative.
And I think we've said a few things not to do, but I think one that I want to leave with before we wrap all this up, you'll read this if you Google how to go get a raise. The last thing you need to go do is go, before you've had any discussion with your manager, is go interview with another company, get an offer, and then go shove that offer in your manager's face. They might match it. If you have leverage, they might match it. But you just burned all the goodwill you had. You are now not trusted. They just paid you to keep you for a while as a freelancer to get some work done. You're not going to be thought of for anything bigger down the road. You're not going to be trusted. That's the last thing you need to do if you want to do this the right way. Now, if you went and you had all these discussions with your manager, you just feel like, look, this place is never going to pay me more, then okay, and you need to make more money, then maybe it's time to leave. But the way to get a raise is not to go shove another offer in the face. Frank, that would be like, telling your wife that, we need to spice up the relationship, and here's how I did it. I went out to the bars a couple months ago and, hooked up with a few girls, and now it's spiced up. No, you go and say, let's spice it up. You don't go rub something in someone's face. You got to give them a chance to earn it.
You might be able to get away with one or two of these things once, but you can't have a pattern of it. And it's just that simple. It really is. And you gotta, everyone is a human. Everybody wants to be respected, you included, with what you're being paid. So it's critical to pick the right steps, but you can't constantly flaunt that stuff in someone's face or threaten you, because it's going to just fall apart.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think ask those 5 questions before you even start. Understand there's a big difference between working in a small company and a big company. An owner is going to make more decisions differently than a manager who has all of the restrictions, who has all of the political stuff to worry about, who has, who's probably more worried about what others think about them than worried about, keeping people or saving people. So you have to think about those things in different size companies. I think you have to really know your goals. Do you want to make 10% more, or do you want to make 3 times more than what you're making? Because the way you behave are 2 very different things. You have to forego the 5 and 10% sometimes to make 3 times what you're making. You have to not be seen as someone who is all about every nickel. You have to be seen as someone who's all about the company being better if you really want to make multiples. And in the conversation, set it up and be honest and make it about the company. Make it about, how do I deliver more for this company so that I can reach my financial goals? But don't be afraid to tell your manager, if you have that relationship, I'm not meeting my financial goals. It's okay to not be terribly happy. I never once gushed, ever, when I would get, every year at MVR, I would get a better raise than most, 4 or 5%. And my manager would always say, that was the best raise that we gave anyone. I would never be like, thanks so much. I would be like, thanks. That was it. I never gushed. I wanted you to think like, is he upset with that? Is he frustrated? Was that not enough? I never gushed ever on salary. That was it. And so I think that's, and including what not to do. Remember that your manager has an ego, and you better play to it if you want this to work. It's not all about you. And they're not going to make these decisions 100% rationally. You have to understand that they're humans, just like in any negotiation. They will make this personally, and their ego will be involved. So you have to play to it. There's no way around it.
Agreed. I mean, I think the summary was great. I don't think we need to delve into it further. That you got to know you earned it. Play your cards. You're in a lifelong poker match, and you got to just play those cards the right way.
100%. Hey, good to see you, buddy.
Always a pleasure, Ian.
Good luck going and making some more money yourself today.
We'll talk soon.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.